For centuries, nuns have lived behind convent walls, devoting their lives to religious service and living a seemingly austere and quiet existence. But what really went on behind those walls? In this video, we'll delve into the surprising and often scandalous stories of nuns throughout history, from medieval times to the modern era. However, it is important to note that some of the content discussed here may be considered offensive or disturbing, and viewer discretion is strongly advised. The Catholic Church has a rule that says priests and nuns can't have romantic relationships, but it's difficult for many of them to follow this rule. Some priests and nuns have sex with each other or with people who go to their church. Celibacy is considered very important to the church, and nuns believe that they're married to Jesus instead of having a human partner. They focus on serving God, but it's hard for many of them to stay true to their vows and their faith. Despite the church's emphasis on celibacy and being holy, there have been a lot of scandals involving priests and nuns breaking these rules. Furthermore, the nuns at San Ambrogio della Massimo in Rome were reportedly subjected to sexual initiation rituals that sometimes involved multiple people. Even after their conference founder, Maria Agnes Ferrario, was removed from her position, other nuns continued to engage in these activities. By the 1850s, Mistress of Novices Maria Luisa had taken over and was enforcing sexual encounters between herself and the nuns in her convent. She even went as far as forging letters from the Virgin Mary and threatening anyone who questioned her methods. Subsequently, the illicit truths buried in the Vatican archives for decades only came to light when scholar Hubert Wolff revealed them in The Nuns of San Ambrogio. What is even more shocking, however, is the extent to which these nuns went to conceal their secrets. In the 1850s, Ferrario, the founder of the convent of San Ambrogio, was stripped of her title as abbess for encouraging other nuns to worship her as a false idol. Maria Luisa, the mistress of novices, assumed Ferrario's position and, like her predecessor, arranged nightly meetings with her novices. What scandalous secrets have nuns been hiding throughout history that will shock you? One nun confessed, "Maria Luisa asked me to lie in a certain position with my legs raised while she entwined herself with me. She then made movements and a sound such as I cannot express in words, as she instructed me to position myself so that I could receive her bodily fluids into me." Maria Luisa claimed that these fluids could cure illnesses. She also asked the novices to lay face to face and breast abreast with her as part of their initiation ritual. Mistress of Novices Maria Luisa was not only having affairs with other nuns, but also with one of the convent's Jesuit confessors. When the two gathered late at night, they avoided suspicion by stating religious communing as the cause. Maria Luisa, in reality, duped the confessor into bed by forging letters from the Virgin Mary. Because of her beautiful handwriting, Luisa urged novice Maria Francesca to write the holy letters, and soon everyone in the convent was obeying the holy commands, including the confessor, who rushed into bed with Maria Luisa. On the other hand, Maria Agnes Ferrario, the convent's founder, was involved in a number of controversies in the early 19th century. Ferrario, while serving as Pope Leo XII's spiritual advisor, found herself in hot water when her actions were revealed. She had not only had an affair with her confessor, but she had also had a three-way tryst with him and another nun. When she became pregnant by religious officials, she pretended to perform miracles and had 2 abortions. Maria Agnes's convent managed to avoid being shut down by the Inquisition in 1816, despite the stripping of the abbess's title. The convent continued its foreign activities in secret. One of the confessors, Joseph Kloikin, who was also an advisor to the Pope and a renowned theologian, was living under an assumed name. In 1848, Kloikin began an affair with one of the nuns, Maria Luisa Clark. During the Inquisition trial, he admitted to having multiple carnal encounters with her, but claimed that their affair was purely spiritual, not driven by lust. Kloikin argued that their relationship was based on religion. Although he confessed to his actions, Kloikin faced only mild punishment. The Inquisition ordered him to be confined to a Jesuit house for 2 years, and he was stripped of his role in hearing confessions. Have you ever heard of the scandalous affair between a confessor and a nun at Maria Agnes's convent that went unpunished by the Inquisition? Maria Agnes's convent was able to continue its illicit activities despite the Inquisition's scrutiny, with one of the confessors, Joseph Kloikin, engaging in an affair with one of the nuns. Despite Kloikin's status as a leading theologian and advisor to the Pope, he was only mildly punished for his actions. The Inquisition confined him to a Jesuit house for 2 years and stripped him of his role in hearing confessions. Maria Luisa introduced new nuns to various unconventional practices, like sexual initiation ceremonies. Maria Luisa informed the nuns that her bodily fluids held divine blessings that might be delivered during the climax. Maria Luisa admitted during the trial that the order's heroic founder, Ferrario, utilized similar ways to pass on her miracle liquor to Maria Luisa and former novices. Maria Luisa's cell was open to novices for the night. If any of the nuns objected to the ceremonies, they grew ill and died unexpectedly. By the age of 36, Princess Katerina von Honsel had been widowed twice. Rather than staying in her homeland, the princess fell in love with Rome's convent of Sant Ambrogio and decided to become a nun. However, not long after, the princess discovered some odd behavior and began to fear for her life. The princess snuck out a mysterious message with the words, "Save me." She suspected Maria Luisa was trying to kill her after discovering the abbess's unlawful and tyrannical behavior. In addition to that, Maria Luisa was put on trial during the Inquisition and accused of several crimes, including lesbian encounters, veneration of a false saint, and murder. However, what really stood out during her trial was her participation in what was known as a Jesuit blessing, which was actually an erotic ceremony. This secret blessing, which was passed down from the convent's founder, Maria Agnes Ferrario, involved French kissing and other intimate acts. Witnesses reported that the male confessor would make the sign of the cross on the throat of the penitent with his tongue, and sometimes even kiss her heart. Some nuns would even fall into a state of ecstasy while receiving the blessing on their knees before the confessor. But what led Maria Luisa to create fake letters from the Virgin Mary instructing her to end Katerina's life? The answer to this is clear yet haunting. Maria Luisa shared an erotic letter with Katerina, a new recruit to the convent. Katerina was shocked by the letter, and Maria Luisa felt threatened by her reaction. To get rid of her, Maria Luisa created fake letters from the Virgin Mary, which instructed her to end Katerina's life. Several attempts were made to kill Katerina, but she managed to escape the convent with the help of her cousin. Despite being seriously ill, Katerina refused all food and medicine and was taken to her family's estate in France to recover. Later on, Maria Luisa admitted to poisoning Katerina with gestopium mercury and powdered glass. These actions were in retaliation for Katerina's reaction to the erotic letter that Maria Luisa had shared with her. Sant Ambrogio was a recently established convent that concealed its wrongdoing from the public eye. In 1806, Sister Maria Agnes Ferrario, a young nun in her early 30s, founded the organization. She gained a considerable following and became renowned for donning an iron mask with over 50 nails that pointed toward her face. Despite claiming to be a living saint, her stigmata was self-inflicted. Moreover, in 1816, the Inquisition tried Ferrario and found her guilty of pretending to be holy and engaging in indecent behavior with her confessor. Ferrario was exiled for the remainder of her life. Although the Sant Ambrogio convent continued to operate, the Inquisition may have been looking for a reason to shut it down. Even after the Inquisition trial, the convent's secrets remained concealed for more than a century. The truth about Sant Ambrogio never came to public. To sum it all up, the lives of nuns throughout history have been shrouded in mystery and misconception. However, by exploring their hidden lives and experiences, we have discovered a rich and varied history that is truly shocking. Some of the women who worked in these establishments are both fascinating and disturbing. Join us as we explore the dark and filthy world of the brothels of the Wild West, where women were forced to endure unimaginable conditions and were often treated as nothing more than objects. From the dangerous diseases that spread like wildfire to the brutal abuse that was all too common, this video will expose the shocking truth about the seedy underbelly of the Wild West. To start with, it is important to note that the gold rush, railroads, and a scent of adventure. Historians in Hollywood like to use these stories often for origins of the Wild West, but the contribution of these factors was only limited to drawing people to the frontier. The Wild West didn't become the West until women arrived, and no, we're not talking about wives and mothers of the early settlers of the West. We're talking about the madams, the ladies of the lions, and the white doves, who used the world's oldest profession to civilize the Wild West. Moreover, in the past, the Wild West was not like what we see in the movies. The towns were not really towns, but just small settlements with tents and holes. Some of these holes were used for sleeping or going to the bathroom, while others were used for people to die in. These were like work camps, and there was no family life. This was during the 1800s, when men and women had very different roles. Women were not present in the Wild West, which meant that the men didn't have anyone to help with the household chores or to take care of them. This made life very difficult for the men, and they would sometimes dress up as women to comfort each other, or pay a lot of money just to see a woman's clothing or body. Consequently, in the Wild West, when women came, they found many men who needed love and were willing to pay for it. These women saw this as an opportunity to earn money because there were not many job options available for women during the 1800s. Women could only work as school teachers, laundresses, clerks, and factory workers, which did not pay much. But being a brothel worker was a way for women to be financially independent, and many women in this trade earned more money than men. There was no social stigma attached to this job in the Wild West, so women were not judged for it. This allowed them to earn money and become financially independent. Therefore, when sheets started to be sold in the Wild West, women came to these areas, which were mostly filled with men. The women earned a lot of money from cowboys who were desperate for their company, and they used this money to start businesses. The women who ran the brothels in the Wild West owned many types of businesses, such as general stores, schools, and infirmaries. They even gave money to build churches so men could go and apologize for spending time with their girls. With all these businesses being created, new cities and towns emerged in the Wild West. The madams had a lot of power because they had money and land, but many of them used their power to help orphans and poor kids go to school, provide support during the Civil War, and give shelter during natural disasters. Thanks to the influence of these saloon girls, Wyoming became the first territory to allow women to vote in 1869. The rest of America did not follow until 1920, when the suffrage movement began. Additionally, the Wyoming suffrage law of 1869 gave women the right to vote, which was considered too bold for the rest of America at that time. Wyoming even threatened to secede from the Union if men in Washington, D.C. couldn't accept the idea of women voting, but Uncle Sam eventually backed down from demanding the law's abolition because of the prevalence of brothels in the Wild West. The concept of an equality state caught on, and the next 8 states to pass suffrage laws were all from the West. Women working in the Wild West could hold the job of sorrel doves, which involved working in various locations such as saloons, dance halls, fancy parlor houses, or even the street. Saloons had humble beginnings in the Wild West, and the wagons these women arrived in had to suffice until buildings were constructed due to the political power held by madams. These women had full legitimacy in their work, and they were protected by authorities even in unincorporated territories. Having said that, the settlements were little though, and humans, they tend to fill pretty quickly. There would be some evenings when the number of patrons in these saloons and parlors would exceed the number of beds available. Although the ladies of the queue may be shielded from the law, this protection frequently only allowed them to operate as ceiling experts. That was a professional phrase used by their clients back then, so it's not like we're making a joke about these women. In the West, violence against these working girls was extremely common. First of all, the laws weren't really doing anything to uphold a woman's dignity, especially if she worked as a parlor girl. The majority of the time, women were hesitant or reluctant to disclose non-consensual encounters because they were afraid that the police would not take their complaint seriously, and that as a result of the report, rumors about their tragedy would spread across the community. Another risk at work was fear of dying. Men occasionally developed a possessive attitude toward women or made unreasonable demands. Meanwhile, in the 1800s, being a parlor or saloon girl was a risky business, and it required a certain set of skills to survive. These women had to know how to break up fights and defend themselves against dangerous men. Madame Belgian Jenny, for instance, passed away because her ex-lover showed her no mercy, even after she was wounded. However, danger wasn't only limited to physical violence. Venereal diseases were rampant during this time, and the treatments for such ailments were as hazardous as the diseases themselves. The lack of penicillin made these women constantly vulnerable to such illnesses, and it was crucial for their health and well-being that they stayed disease-free. Even polite and generous customers didn't necessarily mean safety for these women. Therefore, it was necessary for them to be skilled in various aspects to survive and thrive in this business. A single rumor may ruin their great establishment's reputation. Many madams would push their facility to have monthly doctor visits and examinations to ensure they were disease-free. They would also ensure that the girls maintained decent hygiene and consumed 2 proper meals every day so that they do not appear unwell in any way. Rubber was invented during the Wild West era and was widely available, but it was prohibitively expensive, as were early versions of the diaphragm. According to some estimates, 20% of these workers were pregnant at some point during their careers. Pregnancies were common and often unwelcome in the life of a saloon lady. It was bad for their lives and bad for business. However, avoiding pregnancies was also a challenge. Also, syringes were found during an archaeological investigation at a brothel site from the early Wild West that were used to administer mercury, arsenic, and vinegar to cure sexual disorders or prevent pregnancy. The human body is not good at all of those things. Last but not least, the Cornstalk Act of 1873 made matters worse for Western working women. They had no choice but to rely on homemade cures, which frequently didn't work. Toxic chemicals, frequently derived from plant sources, are included in the medications they were made to take to prevent unintended births. The true number of babies born to working girls in the Old West will never be known. At least some ladies, generally madams, were now able to retire. The most well-known of them all is, of course, Sally Stanford, who entered politics after retiring. Sally was elected to the Sausalito City Council after 5 attempts. Later, she was elected mayor of the same town. When questioned why she ran the 5th time, she smirked and said, "We sinners never give up." In conclusion, we can say that the existence of filthy brothels in the Wild West is a disturbing aspect of the region's history. While these brothels may have provided a service for the men who frequented them, the conditions for the women who worked there were often deplorable. The exploitation and mistreatment of women in these brothels is a reminder of the darker aspects of the Wild West and serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked vice and exploit. Just how did the Puritans feel about sexuality? Contrary to popular belief, Puritan sexual practices were quite modern. The Puritans believed that sexual contact between heterosexual married couples was a divinely given privilege. However, procreation was the exclusive focus of sex in Puritan New England, and non-procreative behaviors were strictly forbidden. Consequently, the Puritans' view of sexuality centered on heterosexual couples. However, within that narrow framework, the Puritans believed that the act itself should be pleasant and loving. Exuberant sexual activity in marriage. The Puritans were generally accepting of physical closeness between married men and women. Author of Worldly Saints, The Puritans as They Were, Leland Ryken, states that married sex was not only lawful in the Puritan paradigm, it was expected to be exuberant. Many famous Puritans have spoken about the delights of close relationships, when two musical instruments perfectly matched create a most pleasant and loving harmony in a finely tuned consort. Clergyman William Gouge once remarked that going to bed together as a married couple should be done with good will and delight, willingly, readily, and happily, since it is one of the most proper and fundamental actions of marriage, wrote Puritan Alexander Nicholas in 1615. Animal sex crimes carried the death penalty, and the animal was slaughtered. As a result, the Puritans were quite strict about what they considered to be obscene behavior with animals. Specifically, in 1621, a youngster named Thomas Granger was hanged for buggery with a mare, a cow, 2 goats, 5 sheep, 2 calves, and a turkey in the Plymouth colony. When it comes to this topic, what does Leviticus 20:15 have to say about it? "And if a man mates with an animal, he must surely be put to death, and ye shall slay the beast." This is what the Puritans did. They added insult to injury by asking Thomas to identify which animals he had sexual contact with. How else could they pick and choose which ones to kill and throw in a grave? You'd be expelled for any kind of animal abuse, even if it was just a joke. Whether or not the Puritans indeed lacked a sense of humor, at least one documented incident demonstrates that the town of New Haven, Connecticut did not like jokes involving filthy activities with animals. There was a high prevalence of sexual activity before marriage. Rachel Fleming, author of Those Loose Ladies, An Examination of Scandalous Puritan Women in Massachusetts, claims that premarital encounters were very common among Puritan women in her period, between the years 1635 and 1700. For instance, 1 in every 200 births in Middlesex County was the result of an unwed mother. Many of the couples admitted their guilt once they were arrested, and then they were flogged or fined. In most cases, the couple was allowed to choose between the two punishments. Fleming also observed that, interestingly, men and women in these cases were punished similarly and regarded as equally at fault for the offense. Discipline was given to men who refused to have sexual relations with their wives. Stephen Prothero, a religious scholar, notes that Puritan males were punished for not having frequent sexual encounters with their wives. Prothero relates a story of a man named James Maddock from 1640 who was excommunicated from his Boston church for denying conjugal fellowship to his wife for 2 years. He was allegedly taking retribution upon himself for assaulting her before marriage. Interrupted coitus was considered a hideous sin. Believe it or not, birth control existed during the same period as the Puritans, but they had nothing to do with it. Even coitus interruptus, onanism, was deemed a hideous sin by the Puritans. The Lord slaughtered Onan over it, so you know it must be horrible, right? This was during a time when some Europeans were using sheep gut condoms, and Iroquois women had birch bark diaphragms as a method of birth control. After the birth of his 14th child, Samuel Sewall prayed in his diary that his wife would stop having children. Homosexuality was the most abominable, unnatural sin. Since being gay was seen as much more awful than adultery, the most abominable, unnatural sin, those convicted of homosexual offenses in early Puritan colonies were executed. At least that was the theory. In practice, we know of only one case in which a gay person was executed by Puritans, and experts agree that the man's outspoken atheism was more likely to blame than his sexual orientation. In most cases, lighter punishments, such as burning on the shoulder, public flogging, or expulsion from the county, were imposed on those convicted of homosexuality. Temperate weather was beneficial to health for married couples. Within the bounds of marriage, Puritans believed that regular climaxes encouraged good health and that a shared orgasm was, in fact, necessary for pregnancy, as reported by Elsie L. Hambleton in Sex and Sexuality in Early America. On the flip side, they believed that too much sexual activity may be detrimental and shorten life. When it came to getting pregnant, excellent food, wine, a relaxed setting, and foreplay were all things that were highly advised by Puritan medical literature to help married couples attain climax. Puritans believed that the only lawful purpose of married sexual activity was propagation, meaning that pleasure itself was not the driving factor. It was a crime to use a disguise for lustful purposes. In 1645, the Puritans passed an odd law that made it illegal to wear visors or masks and weird attire for lascivious intents and purposes. In the words of the law itself, certain excesses have previously broken out among us through concealing. A historian concluded that the law was successful since no case of disguises being worn by masked lubbers occurred in the court records. Indulgences in self-gratification and sexual acts in public were considered crimes against God. Puritans viewed fellatio and male self-pleasure as crimes against God that wasted the seed, as noted by historian Ain Collier, as non-reproductive sexual behaviors, cunnilingus, and female self-pleasure were similarly banned. Bundling was a common practice among courting couples. Puritans doubtlessly promoted unchastity, according to historian Daniel Dorchester, because of a practice known as bundling or tarrying. Why do we need to bundle? Parents would sometimes bundle their daughter and her suitor by placing them to bed together, the lady with only her under petticoat on, and her sweetheart with nothing but his trousers on. A bundling board, or a bag like the one seen in The Patriot, was sometimes used to physically separate the pair. The reasoning for this oddly permissive approach is laid forward by Andrew Gardner. To determine whether or not they were truly compatible, it was suggested that a courting pair spend the night in the girl's bed. This ends our video for today. What are your